There's a certain charm in having your planet's survival based on an alien tax on emotions. It's almost poetic if poetry were a noose around the neck of humanity. The Galactic Coalition's message was clear, like a sledgehammer to the skull: pay up in emotions or perish. Love, joy, fear, hate, convert them into some cosmic currency, and maybe Earth would get to see another sunrise. Leora Phalanx was not the poetic type. She was the type who dug into quantum algorithms the way a rat might dig through a dumpster, persistent and with questionable hygiene habits. Sitting in her cluttered lab, she read the Coalition's ultimatum for the umpteenth time, hoping the words might magically rearrange themselves into a joke. But the punchline was always the same: humanity was screwed. Really, she muttered to the universe. Emotions were the mood ring of the galaxy now. Her only audience was a holographic cat, Hisbot 3000, who flicked its tail in a disinterested loop. It was a budget-conscious purchase, much like her entire life. Meowzaw, it replied, having no idea what it was agreeing to. Leora tossed a crumb of her synthetic bagel at the cat, which passed right through the hologram's chest. Thanks for the input, Furball. She kicked back in her chair, which groaned under the weight of too much cheap plastic and too little ergonomic consideration. The lab was a disaster, all blinking screens and buzzing data ports. It looked like a spaceship had vomited tech everywhere, which wasn't far from the truth. A sharp chime cut through her reverie, like a polite guillotine. Leora snapped out of her existential funk and tapped a panel. The face of Commander Zane Thorne appeared, taking up most of the screen with his chiseled jaw and deadpan expression. Phalanx, status report, Thorne demanded, as if the fate of Earth hinged on her ability to craft a coherent sentence. Status: we're a planetary laughingstock about to pay an intergalactic IRS in tiered jerks and giggles. How's that for status? Thorne's eyes could have melted tungsten. Find a solution and maybe the galaxy won't repossess Earth. Leora pinched the bridge of her nose. Let's see, maybe we could crowdsource some depression. Plenty of that going around. Be serious, Thorne snapped. We need an analysis on how to quantify emotions. The Coalition won't wait forever. Leora grimaced, swatting away virtual data streams with the efficiency of someone who's forgotten what outside looks like. All right. I'll see if I can turn a smile into a spreadsheet. Might be easier to just sell a kidney. The screen blipped off, leaving Leora alone with her thoughts and the mocking silence of the lab. Quantifying emotions, like putting hurricanes in a bottle. She rubbed her eyes and stared at her monitors, willing inspiration to strike. An incoming message pinged, breaking the monotony. It was from Dr. Ilara Vex, a colleague with a penchant for sarcasm that rivaled Leora's own. Wondered when you'd call, Leora greeted, fingers tapping impatiently. Didn't want to intrude on your pity party, Ilara replied, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. How's life in the emotional black market? I'm knee-deep in feelings and they're worth less than crypto, Leora said, glancing at the data streams that cluttered her screen. Ilara snorted. Well, at least you're not in accounting, small mercies. Leora leaned forward, squinting at a particularly stubborn code string. What's the Coalition's game, anyway? Ilara mused. What do a bunch of cosmic bureaucrats want with human emotions? Leora shrugged, though Ilara couldn't see it. Maybe they're tired of their own soap operas. Need fresh material. Good thing we're experts in drama, Ilara said, an edge of bitterness creeping in. The connection dwindled into a comfortable silence, the kind you could only share with someone who understands the futility of the human condition as much as you do. Eventually, Ilara spoke up again. Think you can crack it, crack it. A dry laugh escaped Leora's lips. I'll try not to break it more. We're all rooting for you, Ilara said, and for once, it wasn't a joke. The call ended, leaving Leora to mull over her screen of hopeless data points. Quantum analyst, they called her, more like doom interpreter. A new message popped up, this time from the Special Projects Division. It was an invitation, or maybe a summons, for a meeting with the big brains, the supposed geniuses tasked with saving humanity's sorry hide. Leora sighed and stood, her joints popping like firecrackers. She threw on a jacket, one that had seen better days back when fashion was still a concern, and made her way to the conference room. The hallways of the station hummed with the activity of desperate people trying not to look desperate. It was a fine art, perfected over years of societal collapse. Leora slipped through the throng, a ghost among specters. Inside the meeting room, a semicircle of scientists eyed her like she was the main course at a Last Supper. Their names escaped her, but their faces were all too familiar, gaunt, tired, and sporting the kind of expressions that came from staring into the abyss and having it stare back. Phalanx, the lead genius, Dr. Catal, began with a voice like creaking ice. "You have been working on the emotion quantifier." "Any progress?" Leora made a face like she'd just bitten into a lemon. "If by progress you mean I haven't thrown myself out the airlock, then sure. Levity is not appreciated," Catal said, eyes narrowing. "Neither is this situation," Leora replied, leaning forward. "You want me to distill the essence of humanity's emotional spectrum into something we can trade. Well, let me tell you, it's a mess. Like trying to sell bottled chaos. We need numbers, Phalanx. Numbers that will satisfy the coalition," said a balding man to her left, brows knitted together as if trying to physically will a solution into existence. "Sure, and I'll just pull those numbers out of my—" Catal cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Enough. We understand the difficulty, but the deadline looms. We must have a breakthrough." Leora glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of each beleaguered scientist in turn. "Then let's figure out what makes us tick before our time's up." The meeting dissolved into theories and counter-theories, the air thick with tension and unsaid fears. Leora scribbled notes, half listening to the debates swirling around her. The session dragged on, the weight of impending doom pressing down like a physical force. Finally, as the discussion petered out, Leora stood, stretching limbs stiff from hours of confinement. "Well, gents and ladies," she said, heading for the door, "I'll just get back to saving the world one existential crisis at a time." Her exit was punctuated by a murmur of disbelief mixed with reluctant admiration. It was the standard reaction, plenty of skepticism, a dash of hope. Back in the lab, the stale air and familiar hum of computers welcomed her like an old, dysfunctional friend. She dropped into her chair, ignoring its protest, and stared at her screens. "All right, emotions," she muttered. "Let's see what makes you tick." Eyes blurred into each other as Leora delved into her work. Her mind danced through algorithms, seeking a rhythm that might unlock humanity's emotional treasure chest. Every failure was another nail in the coffin of hope, but that didn't stop her from trying. Just as her vision began to swim with fatigue, a chime broke the silence. She blinked at the screen, which displayed a notification from the coalition itself. An update on the ultimatum. "Well, isn't that just peachy?" she said to the empty room. She opened the message, its official tone as warm as an ice bath. The coalition had revised the terms. More emotions would need to be sacrificed, as if they were upping the ante in a game where humans had nothing left to bet. Leora swore under her breath, her frustration boiling over. They just can't get enough, can they? A soft meow from HissBot 3000 added a surreal touch to her outrage. She sat back, contemplating the uphill battle she faced. With a deep breath, Leora steeled herself. Failure wasn't an option, not with the weight of humanity's future hanging in the balance. "All right, you cosmic accountants," she muttered defiantly. "Let's show you what kind of currency humanity's got." Determination set in, a renewed vigor propelling her into the midnight hours. The screens flickered with numbers and code, her fingers dancing across the keys like a musician on speed. As the station settled into the quiet of artificial night, Leora worked on, fueled by caffeine and the stubborn refusal to let the universe win. Her eyes burned, but the fire within them was unwavering. She might not have the solution yet, but by every star in the damned galaxy, she'd find it. And when she did, the coalition would rue the day they underestimated the power of human resilience. In the end, it was a long shot, but it was the only shot they had. And in Leora's book, that made it worth taking. Leora squinted at the message from the Coalition, her expression sour enough to curdle milk. Fantastic, she murmured to herself, as if I didn't have enough reasons to hate Mondays. She flicked the message into oblivion with a swipe of her hand, then returned her attention to the blinking mass of data streaming across her screen like a digital Niagara Falls. If she could just make sense of this emotional racket, they might stand a chance of keeping Earth off the intergalactic repo list. Just as she was about to dive back into her analysis, the lab door slid open with a hiss, and in strolled her mentor, Dr. Vex Icarus. Wearing a lab coat as wrinkled as his outlook on life, Vex had a perpetually disheveled appearance that suggested he regularly lost arguments with laundry robots. "Ah, Leora," he said, his voice like sandpaper on steel, "still wrestling with the emotional voodoo, I see." "And losing as usual," she replied, not bothering to mask the frustration in her tone. Vex chuckled, a sound that could have stripped paint. "Well, you're in luck. I've got a little something that might help turn the tide." Leora arched an eyebrow, skepticism etched in every line of her face. "Unless it's a magic wand or a direct line to the gods of good fortune, I'm not holding my breath." Vex waved a hand dismissively. "Magic wands are out of stock, and the gods have us on hold, but this might just do the trick." He tapped a small device clipped to his belt, and a holographic projection sprang to life between them. The image displayed a sleek piece of alien tech, all sharp angles and wicked edges, like something designed by a committee of sadistic architects. It pulsed with an eerie, otherworldly glow that screamed "do not touch" louder than a nuclear reactor. "Behold," Vex said with a flourish that was somehow both sarcastic and sincere, "the Coalition's latest toy." An emotion quantifier. Leora leaned forward, her curiosity piqued despite her better judgment. "And this does what exactly, besides look like a prop from a bad sci-fi holoflick? It measures and taxes human emotions," Vex explained. "At quantum level, no less. It's how they're monetizing our mood swings." "Great," Leora muttered. "We're being reduced to a collection of cosmic mood rings." "Quite. And if we can't figure out how it works, we're all going to be very, very poor, and possibly erased from the universe's collective memory." Leora rubbed her temples, trying to dispel the headache threatening to turn her skull into a percussion instrument. "So, what's the plan? Do we have one, or are we just playing it by ear?" "Playing it by ear is the only plan we've got," Vex said with a shrug that suggested he'd already resigned himself to the universe's absurdity. "But I have a few ideas." She eyed him warily. "Ideas that don't involve blowing up the Coalition, I hope." "Perish the thought," he replied with a grin that was all teeth and no mirth. "Let's start with understanding the quantifier. If we can reverse engineer it, or at least learn how to jam its signals, we might just buy ourselves some time." Leora nodded slowly, her mind already racing with possibilities. "All right, let's take this alien Rubik's Cube apart and see what makes it tick." They settled into a rhythm, the lab awash with the soft glow of their screens and the muted hum of machinery. Vex worked with the focus of a man who had nothing left to lose, while Leora attacked the problem with the fervor of someone who'd bet their last credit on a long shot. "How's it look?" Vex asked after a while, peering over her shoulder at the chaotic jumble of data she'd assembled. "Like hell's version of a crossword puzzle," Leora replied, not bothering to hide her exasperation. "But I think I've found something. These algorithms, they're designed to lock onto emotional frequencies." "Go on," Vex prompted, his interest piqued. "Well," she continued, "it's like they're tuning into our emotions the way you tune into a radio station. If we can disrupt that signal, throw off their frequency, we might be able to mess with their readings." Vex nodded, a glint of approval in his eye. "Clever, very clever." "But how do we disrupt a signal encoded at a quantum level?" Leora smirked, though there was little humor in it. "That's the million-credit question, Vex, but I've got a hunch." "Do tell," he said, leaning in conspiratorially. "Remember how we used to disrupt the security feeds back in the academy? A little static, a little noise. And suddenly the cameras were seeing ghosts." Vex finished, his grin returning. I like it, a little playground chaos for the coalition. Exactly, Leora said, feeling a flicker of hope amid the gloom. If we can flood the quantifier with a bunch of emotional white noise, it might just throw them off their game. Vex rubbed his chin thoughtfully. It'll take some doing. But if anyone can pull it off, it's you. High praise from a man who once told me I'd never amount to more than a footnote in a textbook, she joked, though there was an edge of sincerity beneath her words. Vex chuckled, the sound rough but not unkind. I've always believed in your potential to cause trouble, Leora. Now let's see if we can weaponize it. They spent the next few hours huddled over their screens, fingers flying over keyboards, minds sharp with focus and caffeine. The lab became a hive of activity, a place where hope was a tangible thing that could be conjured from the wreckage of despair. At some point, Hisbot 3000 wandered over, its holographic form flickering like a bad transmission. It hopped onto Leora's desk, settling down with the regal air of a monarch overseeing its subjects. Perfect, Leora muttered, glancing at the holographic cat. Now I'm being judged by a digital feline. Vex snorted, not looking up from his work. That's what cats do best, digital or otherwise. As the hours passed, their plan began to take shape, a patchwork quilt of ingenuity and desperation. It was a long shot, but it was more than they had before, and that was enough to keep them going. Finally, as the station's lights dimmed to mimic the night cycle, Vex leaned back with a sigh that carried the weight of the universe. I think we've got it, he said, a note of triumph in his voice. Leora nodded, exhaustion tugging at her eyes but unable to dim the fire within them. Let's hope it's enough. Vex rose, stretching his arms above his head with a series of pops and cracks that could have doubled as a percussion section. Get some rest, Leora. You'll need your wits about you for tomorrow. She nodded again, though the idea of sleep felt as distant and fantastical as a fairy tale. I'll try. He hesitated, then placed a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture of camaraderie from a man who valued solitude. Good work today. We'll figure this out. Leora offered a tired smile. Well, if we don't, at least we'll have gone down swinging. With that, Vex departed, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the gentle hum of the lab's machinery. She gazed at the mess of data on her screen, feeling a curious blend of hope and despair. All right, she murmured to herself. Time to put this plan into action. Let's see if we can teach those cosmic bureaucrats a thing or two about human ingenuity. With a final glance at the holographic cat, which blinked at her with digital indifference, Leora turned off the lab's lights and made her way back to her quarters. The corridors of the station were silent, filled with the echoes of footfalls and the ghosts of desperate hope. As she lay down, the weight of the world pressing down like a leaden sky, she allowed herself a sliver of optimism. They were outmatched, outgunned, and out of time, but they were still fighting, still refusing to let the universe have the last laugh. And if there was one thing humanity excelled at, Leora thought with a wry smile, it was laughing in the face of impossible odds. By the time she drifted into an uneasy sleep, her mind was already strategizing, plotting, and dreaming of a future where Earth wasn't just a line item in an alien ledger. In the morning, the battle would continue. But for now, there was rest, and the faint, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, they could pull off the impossible. Because if they didn't, well, at least they'd go down with a hell of a story to tell. Leora woke up to the dulcet tones of her alarm, a grating buzz that sounded like a swarm of angry bees trapped in a tin can. She slapped it off with a muttered curse and dragged herself out of bed, feeling about as refreshed as a week-old corpse. Coffee. She needed coffee. The lifeblood of the sleep-deprived and the only thing standing between her and a minor homicide. The walk to the lab was a blur of yawns and autopilot navigation, but by the time she arrived, her brain was halfway functional, and she was armed with a steaming mug of synthetic caffeine. Vex was already there, looking like a mad scientist who'd spent the night wrestling with equations and lost comprehensively. His hair stuck out in odd directions, and his eyes had the wild gleam of a man on the edge of a breakthrough or a breakdown. "Morning, sunshine," Leora greeted, plopping down at her station. "You look like death warmed over." Vex raised an eyebrow, his expression somewhere between amused and homicidal. "And you look like you raided the morgue for fashion tips." "Charming as always," she shot back, gulping down her coffee like it might spontaneously evaporate. "Any progress on our little sabotage project?" Vex leaned back in his chair, arms folded as he surveyed the chaotic mess of data and half-assembled tech that littered the lab. "Depends on how you define progress. If making our problems worse counts, then we're ahead of schedule." "Great. At this rate, we'll save Earth by accidentally blowing it up," Leora quipped, pulling up the array of alien tech they'd dissected the night before. As they worked, there was a strange tension in the air, like the calm before a storm, or maybe it was just the oppressive weight of their impending doom. The quantifier was a nasty piece of work, and they needed to crack it like yesterday. But every step forward felt like 2 steps back, like trying to sprint through quicksand. Their brainstorming was interrupted by the arrival of HissBot 3000, who sat demurely on Leora's desk, flickering slightly like a bad hologram. Its digital eyes watched her with a disapproving glare that suggested it had already judged her and found her wanting. "Hey, HissBot," Leora said, absently scratching its unresponsive holographic head. "You here to offer moral support or just judge my life choices?" "Probably both," Vex muttered, squinting at a particularly stubborn line of code. "At least it won't cough up hairballs." "Good thing, too." "I imagine digital hairballs are a pain to clean up." Leora's screen suddenly glitched, the lines of code twisting and distorting like a funhouse mirror. She frowned, tapping a few keys as if she could bully the technology into obedience. "No luck." "What the hell?" she muttered, rebooting the system. Vex looked up, frowning. "Problems? Glitch." "Probably just another reminder that the universe hates us," Leora said, shaking her head. But a nagging suspicion tugged at her mind. Something felt off. "Welcome to the club," Vex replied, returning to his work with a weary sigh. A few minutes later it happened again. And again. The screen flickered, the data scrambled, and Leora's frustration boiled over like a neglected kettle. "What is this crap?" she snapped, slamming her mug down with enough force to send a small splash of coffee onto her desk. Vex strode over, peering at her screen with a furrowed brow. "That's not just a glitch. Someone's tampering with the system." A chill ran down Leora's spine, the creeping realization dawning like a bad punchline. "You think we've been hacked? Either that or the gremlins are getting creative," Vex grumbled, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "We need to find the source of this interference before it wrecks everything we've done." "Fantastic," Leora muttered. "Because dealing with aliens wasn't enough, now we have to play cat and mouse with a phantom hacker." She and Vex worked in tense silence, probing the system for any sign of intrusion. The lab felt smaller, more claustrophobic, as if the very walls were closing in to witness their failure. Leora's heart pounded in her chest, a drumbeat of anxiety as she sifted through lines of code, searching for any clue to their saboteur's identity. Finally, Vex let out a low whistle, drawing Leora's attention. "Got something," he said, pointing to a string of alien characters embedded in the data. "That's coalition tech," Leora realized with a sinking feeling. "Someone's using their own equipment to mess with us. And I doubt it's out of the goodness of their hearts," Vex replied grimly. "Looks like we've got a mole." "Great," Leora said, the sarcasm practically dripping from her words. "Because intergalactic espionage was exactly what I wanted to add to my resume." Their situation had just taken a nosedive from bad to worse. Not only were they fighting against an alien threat, but now they had to watch their own backs for any sign of betrayal from within. It was like playing a game of chess where half the pieces were secretly trying to stab you in the back. "So what's the plan?" Leora asked, glancing at Vex. "How do we root out a traitor when we don't even know who we're looking for?" Vex rubbed his chin thoughtfully, his eyes narrowing as he considered their options. "We lay a trap," he said finally. "Feed them false data, see who bites." Risky, Leora pointed out. If they catch on, they'll just go deeper underground. True, Vex conceded. But it's our best chance to smoke them out, and if we don't, they'll sabotage us at the worst possible moment. All right, Leora said reluctantly, her mind already spinning with possibilities. Let's set this trap and hope we're smarter than whoever's trying to screw us over. Together, they crafted a fake data set, something that looked important but was ultimately worthless. It was a delicate balance, making it convincing enough to lure the saboteur in without tipping their hand. Then they waited, tension coiling in their stomachs like a serpent ready to strike. As the Iors dragged on, Leora found herself glancing nervously at the lab's security feeds, searching for any sign of their phantom intruder. The weight of the unknown pressed down on her like an oppressive force, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. Finally, a blip on the screen, a foreign signal probing their fake data. Leora's heart leapt into her throat, a mix of triumph and dread swirling within her. "Gotcha," Vex whispered, a predatory gleam in his eye as he traced the signal back to its source. "Let's see who's been playing games." The trail led them deeper into the station's systems, a tangled web of connections that finally resolved into a single, damning terminal. Leora felt her blood run cold as she recognized the ID tag, one of their own. "Bloody hell," she murmured, staring at the terminal as if it might suddenly sprout fangs. "It's Malkov." Vex's expression hardened, all traces of his usual humor evaporating like morning mist. "Of course it is," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Always the ones you least suspect." Malkov was a technician, one of the many faceless individuals working tirelessly to keep the station running. He was competent, unassuming, and had about as much personality as a wet blanket, perfect cover for a saboteur. "So what do we do now?" Leora asked, her mind racing with possibilities. "Confront him." "Not yet," Vex said, his tone cautious. "We need to figure out how deep this goes. If Malkov's just a pawn, we'll need to cut the whole damn tree, not just a branch." "Right. And if he's the mastermind, then we take him down," Vex replied, his eyes cold as a starless night. "And make sure he won't be causing any more trouble." Their plan was set, but the stakes had never been higher. Not only were they fighting against the clock to save their planet, but now they had to navigate the treacherous waters of betrayal, hoping they could outsmart a foe lurking in the shadows. As they prepared to confront Malkov, Leora couldn't help but feel a grim sense of irony. They were trying to save humanity by fighting against humanity itself, a battle as old as time, now playing out on a cosmic scale. But if history had taught her anything, it was that humans were at their best when their backs were against the wall. And if push came to shove, they'd find a way to cheat the Reaper, even if it meant kicking him in the shin on the way out. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own revelations, and possibly a battle for survival. But for tonight, they had a plan, a sliver of hope, and the fierce determination to see it through. And if they failed, well, they'd go down swinging, with a middle finger raised to the universe itself. Because if there was one thing humanity wouldn't stand for, it was being shoved into the cosmic void without a fight. In the end, they'd either save the world or burn it down trying. Either way, it promised to be one hell of a ride. "Well, this is a shit sandwich with extra relish," Leora muttered, staring at the terminal with the damning evidence implicating Malkov. "Just what we needed, an inside job." Whose bright idea was it to run the Intergalactic Espionage Club out of our own damn lab? Vex leaned back in his chair, hands behind his head, eyes on the ceiling like he was contemplating the mysteries of the universe. Or maybe just considering how flammable Malkov's workstation was. "I dunno, but I bet they're not winning any Employee of the Month awards." Leora snorted, the sound halfway between amusement and derision. "Yeah, well, if our planet wasn't on the verge of interstellar foreclosure, I'd joke about handing out medals for incompetence." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their new discovery pressing down like a leaden blanket. If Malkov was a mole, he wasn't acting alone. Hell, he could be just the tip of an iceberg that was about to sink their entire operation. Any chance this is all some elaborate prank? Leora asked, though she knew the answer. Hope was a stubborn little bastard that refused to die, even when faced with overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Unless the punchline involves an alien tax collector knocking on Earth's door, I doubt it, Vex replied, his tone dry enough to start a fire. Looks like we've got a network of sympathizers to root out. Sympathizers, Leora repeated, the word tasting sour on her tongue. Sounds so reasonable, like they're just a group of well-meaning activists instead of people selling us out to aliens. Trust me, they're no better than those guys who cut in line at the cafeteria, Vex said, his voice laced with contempt. And they're just as deserving of a good throttling. Leora sighed, running a hand through her hair. The chaos in her mind mirrored the mess on her desk, a chaotic jumble of half-formed plans and stray coffee mugs. All right, we need a plan. Something that doesn't involve setting fire to the station. Bummer. Fire's always plan A, Vex joked, though his expression was serious. We need to find out who else is involved. If we start poking the wrong hornet's nest, we'll end up with stingers in our backsides. Agreed, Leora said. Let's start by digging into Malkov's connections. See if we can map out this little conspiracy of theirs. They worked in grim determination, fingers flying over keyboards, piecing together the web of deceit that had infiltrated their midst. Each new thread they uncovered added to the tapestry of betrayal, painting a picture that was as complex as it was infuriating. Hey, look at this, Leora said, pointing at a name that had popped up more than once in Malkov's communications. Hannah Distra. Isn't she the one who always brings those awful vegan cookies to the lab meetings? Vex groaned, the sound filled with both recognition and loathing. Those things are a crime against humanity. I should have known anyone capable of such culinary atrocities would be up to no good. Great, Leora said, rolling her eyes. We're being sabotaged by the vegan cookie brigade. What next? A hostile takeover by the knitting club, possibly, Vex replied, not missing a beat. I hear they are tough as nails once you get on their bad side. Their investigation uncovered more names, each one a new piece in the puzzle they were desperately trying to solve. It was like a game of whack-a-mole, except the moles were traitors, and the mallet was their sanity. As they worked, the looming deadline of the alien ultimatum ticked closer, a cosmic clock counting down to disaster. The pressure was enough to make anyone crack, but somehow, Leora found humor in the absurdity of their predicament. Hey, remember when saving the world just meant recycling and riding a bike to work? She asked, a wry smile tugging at her lips. Yeah, Vex replied with a chuckle. Now it's all about stopping intergalactic repo men from seizing our planet. Funny how things escalate. Just another day in paradise, Leora said, her sarcasm as sharp as a plasma blade. If we pull this off, I'm taking a vacation. Maybe somewhere nice and quiet like Pluto. Well, if Earth gets repossessed, you might not have much choice, Vex pointed out. Pluto might be the only real estate left. Iors bled together, a blur of caffeine and conspiracy unraveling under their relentless scrutiny. Leora's eyes burned from staring at the screen, but the thought of stopping felt like giving up. And if there was one thing she couldn't stand, it was quitting. All right, I think we've got enough to confront our friendly neighborhood saboteurs, Vex said finally, stretching his arms above his head. Time to shake the tree and see what falls out. Sounds like a plan, Leora agreed, though apprehension gnawed at her insides like a hungry rat. But if this goes south, we might need a backup plan. Maybe something involving flamethrowers, noted Vex said, his grin a flash of white in the dim light of the lab. Let's go break some bad news, or break some heads, whichever comes first. They made their way through the labyrinthine corridors of the station, the hum of machinery a constant backdrop to their thoughts. The tension in the air was palpable, an electric charge that promised things were about to get very interesting. Their first stop was Malkov's quarters, a utilitarian space that reflected its occupant's personality or lack thereof. The man himself was seated at a desk, his back to the door, completely unaware of the storm about to descend. "Evening, Malkov," Vex said, his voice dripping with false cheer. "Mind if we have a little chat?" Malkov spun in his chair, his expression a mix of confusion and annoyance. Sure. What's this about?" "Oh, nothing much," Leora replied, her tone as casual as if she were discussing the weather. "Just wanted to ask why you're conspiring to sell us out to aliens." The color drained from Malkov's face, leaving him looking like a ghost caught in the headlights. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, his eyes darting to the door as if considering a quick escape. "Save it," Vex said, cutting him off. "We've got the data. We know you've been in contact with sympathizers, so you can either come clean or we'll make sure you never work in this galaxy again." Malkov opened his mouth to protest, but the words died on his lips. The fear in his eyes was almost palpable, a testament to the power of their threat. All right, he said, sagging in his chair like a balloon with the air let out. "I didn't want to do it, okay. But they've got leverage. If I didn't help, they'd what?" Leora pressed, her patience wearing thin. "They'd what? They'd turn me over to the Coalition," Malkov confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. "They said I was a liability, that if I didn't cooperate, they'd make sure I was the one who paid the price." "Leverage, huh?" Vex said, exchanging a glance with Leora. "And who's the puppet master pulling your strings?" Malkov hesitated, the internal struggle playing out on his face. "Seraph. He's the one coordinating everything. But I swear I didn't want to save it for someone who cares," Leora interrupted, her voice cold and hard. "You made your bed, Malkov. Now you've got to lie in it." They left him there, a broken man caught in the web of his own making. But as they walked away, Leora couldn't shake the feeling that things were far from over. If anything, they'd just opened Pandora's box and the real fight was yet to come. Their next move was clear: confront Seraph and shut down this network before it tore their mission apart. The stakes had never been higher, and the clock was ticking down to zero. But if there was one thing Leora knew, it was that humans were stubborn creatures. And when pushed, they pushed back twice as hard. It was a gamble, a high-stakes game of cat and mouse with the fate of the world hanging in the balance. Still, optimism was for fools and dreamers, and Leora was neither. All she had was a plan, a partner in crime, and a burning desire to prove that humanity wasn't going down without a fight. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for tonight, they were ready to face whatever came their way. And if the universe didn't like it, well, that was just too damn bad. The hum of the station's fluorescent lights was like a bad joke that never got old. Leora stared at the screen in front of her, the symbols and figures blurring into an incomprehensible mess. If anyone asked, she'd blame the synthetic caffeine. But deep down, she knew it was something else, an impending sense of doom that had lodged itself in her gut like a stubborn bit of gristle. Dr. Vex Icarus's absence was a palpable void. Their mentor, the scruffy genius who always had a snarky comment or a half-baked solution, had been snatched up like a bargain at a clearance sale. The news had hit them like a meteor. They'd found his lab in disarray, chairs overturned, and the ominous flicker of a half-powered terminal casting eerie shadows. It seemed Malkov's betrayal was merely the appetizer before this unpleasant main course. Commander Zane Thorne's voice crackled over the intercom, all gruff authority and no nonsense. "Phalanx, report," Leora sighed, tapping her fingers against the console. "Still here, still fighting the good fight." "Well, mostly fighting sleep deprivation and insanity, but you know, close enough. If I wanted sarcasm, I'd activate HISBot 3000, Thorne replied, voice as dry as a desert planet. "What's the status on Dr. Icarus?" "Missing, likely captured, and probably wishing he'd taken up knitting instead of alien tech dissection," she shot back. "And no, we haven't got a lead on where they're holding him." There was a pause, and Leora imagined Thorne pinching the bridge of his nose in frustration. "We've got 2 days until the Coalition's deadline. If we don't stop this, they're going to bleed us dry, and Earth won't be able to foot the bill with emotions alone." Yeah, I'm aware. Just another Tuesday in hell, Leora muttered, but the line was already dead. Thorn had a lot of faith in her, which was flattering until she realized that faith was awaiting its miracle, and she was fresh out of divine interventions. She turned to Hisbot 3000, the holographic cat hovering by her side, its faux fur shimmering in the dim glow. Any brilliant ideas, Whiskers? The bot replied with a digital purr, its programmed response for anything it couldn't process. Which was, admittedly, most things, but hey, it was comforting in a useless sort of way. With Vex missing, the station felt emptier, the corridors longer and less like a place where iron wills could clash. Now they just seemed like the hallways of a rundown motel on a backwater moon, waiting for someone to turn off the lights for good. The rest of their team was a fractured mess. Some were holed up in their quarters, others were pretending to be useful in their labs, but the truth was, morale had taken a nosedive. They were a ship without a captain, and no amount of pep talks from Thorn was going to change that. Leora found herself wandering into the common area, where a few of the team had gathered. The room was a far cry from the bustling hub it had once been. Now it was just a collection of tired faces and half-eaten meal packs. "Hannah, got any of those god-awful cookies left?" Leora asked, sliding into a seat next to the bespectacled woman. Hannah Distrad looked up from her tablet, offering a weak smile. "You're in luck. There's a batch fresh from the replicator, or straight from the ninth circle of hell." Leora chuckled, though the sound was hollow. "Perfect. I need something to remind me life could be worse." Across the table, Jerk, one of the junior techs, snorted. "Worse than having our planet repossessed. Worse than losing Vex. Enlighten me." She shrugged, biting into a cookie that might as well have been a piece of flavored cardboard. Could be stuck listening to Commander Thorn's motivational speeches on repeat. The group managed a laugh, though it was more out of desperation than genuine amusement. But for a moment the bleakness lifted, if only a smidge. "So what's the plan, fearless leader?" Jerk asked, his tone only half mocking. "Well," Leora said, leaning back in her chair, "we could try reasoning with the Coalition. Maybe offer them some prime real estate on Mars, or we could just strap ourselves to a rocket and see where we land." Jerk's expression softened, his bravado slipping. "We miss Vex." "Yeah, me too," Leora replied softly, the weight of his absence pressing down on her like a lead vest. "But he'd want us to keep fighting, to be clever, to outthink these bastards." "Think he's okay?" Hannah asked, her voice small. "Vex, he's tougher than he looks, probably driving his captors insane with his charming personality," Leora said, though she didn't quite believe it herself. "But we've got to find him, and fast." "Maybe we should focus on Malkov," Jerk suggested. "If we can crack his communications, we might trace it back to where they're holding Vex." "Good thinking," she replied. "Let's just hope our friendly neighborhood traders left us a breadcrumb trail." They spent the next few hours delving into Malkov's encrypted files, their fingers flying over keyboards as they chased digital shadows and half-formed leads. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made every creak and murmur seem ominous. As they worked, Leora found herself slipping into a rhythm, the familiarity of the task a balm to her frayed nerves. It was like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces kept changing shape, a challenge that demanded focus and ingenuity. But even as they uncovered fragments of information, the clock continued its relentless march towards the Coalition's deadline. Each passing hour felt like a grain of sand slipping through an hourglass, the inevitability of their predicament gnawing at her resolve. The rest of the team drifted in and out, some offering insights, others just looking for a momentary reprieve from the oppressive atmosphere. They were a ragtag group, held together by desperation and stubbornness, but they were all she had. Eventually they hit a break, a thread that hinted at a location, a small, unregistered outpost on the outer rim of the system. It was a long shot, but it was the best lead they'd found all day. "Looks like we've got a destination," Leora said, her voice tinged with cautious optimism. "Time to suit up and go find our missing genius." The team nodded, a sense of purpose rekindling the fire in their eyes. It was a fragile thing, easily snuffed out, but it was enough to keep them going. As they prepared for the mission, Leora couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom that clung to the air like a bad smell. They were running out of time, and every delay brought them closer to the point of no return. But despite the odds stacked against them, she refused to give in to despair. Vex was counting on them, and she wasn't about to let him down. Besides, if they were going to go down, they might as well go down swinging. Better to burn out in a blaze of defiance than fade away into obscurity. With the coordinates locked in and the team assembled, they made their way to the docking bay. The plan was simple: get in, find Vex, and get out before anyone realized what they were up to. Easy, right? Well, in theory. As they boarded the battered old shuttle, Leora couldn't help but smile at the absurdity of it all. Here they were, a mismatched group of misfits, about to launch a rescue mission against overwhelming odds. And yet, despite the insanity of it all, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they were doomed. Maybe the universe was conspiring against them. But if they were going to fail, they were damn well going to fail with style. "All right, team," she said, strapping herself into the pilot's seat. "Let's go save the world, one sarcastic comment at a time." The engines roared to life, and with a lurch they were off, hurtling towards the unknown with nothing but their wits and a healthy dose of gallows humor to guide them. As the stars streaked past, Leora allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. It wasn't much, but in the chaos of their situation, it was enough to keep the darkness at bay. "Hey, Vex," she murmured to the empty seat beside her, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "We're coming for you, so try not to annoy your captors too much, okay? We don't need them throwing you out of an airlock before we get there." The silence was her only response, but she imagined she could hear his chuckle, the sound a faint echo in her mind. With a deep breath, she focused her attention on the task at hand. The road ahead was fraught with danger, but they were ready to face it head-on. Because when it came down to it, humans were nothing if not tenacious. And as long as they had a scrap of hope to cling to, they weren't about to go quietly into the night. The shuttle rattled like a rust bucket with delusions of grandeur, barely holding together as it hurtled through the void. Leora squinted at the flickering navigation display, half convinced that a particularly determined sneeze could send them spiraling off into the abyss. "Is this heap going to make it?" Hannah asked, her voice a mix of skepticism and the resigned tone of someone who'd tried one too many questionable meal packs. "Let's hope so," Leora replied, thumping the console for good measure. "Otherwise, we'll just have to start a new life as space debris. Could be worse." "At least there's no taxes on space dust." There was a collective groan from the crew, a symphony of gallows humor and mutual exasperation. It was the kind of camaraderie born from shared disaster, the kind that made you feel slightly better about the mess you were all in. Jerk leaned over, squinting at the console like it might offer secrets if he stared hard enough. "You sure about those coordinates?" "I'd rather not end up in the middle of a supernova. Supernova's got nothing on Thorne's wrath if we screw this up." Leora smirked, clearly enjoying the flash of horror that crossed his face. "Relax," I triple-checked. "This isn't my first rescue rodeo. More like a rescue donkey ride with these resources," Hannah muttered, earning herself a snicker from Leora. The banter was interrupted by a digital meow. His bot 3000 flickered to life, projecting its holographic feline form onto the console. The bot had a knack for appearing when least needed, like an unwanted guest or a hangover. "Ah, a resident philosopher," Leora drawled. "Got any wisdom to share with the class?" His bot purred, pausing as its system processed the situation. "Survival chances, statistically unlikely," Jerk snorted. "Great. I feel better already." The shuttle continued its bumpy journey across the stars, the thrumming engines mimicking the pulse of Leora's caffeine-fueled heart. Despite the odds, there was a glimmer of hope buried beneath her sarcasm, a tiny spark that refused to be snuffed out by the universe's indifference. They were the underdogs, after all, and underdogs were known for two things: being underestimated and biting ankles when you least expected it. Eventually, the outpost came into view, a speck of metal and desperation clinging tenuously to the edge of nothingness. It wasn't much to look at, but it was their last, best hope of finding Vex. "Okay, team," Leora announced, nudging the shuttle into a docking maneuver that wouldn't get them killed. "Showtime. Let's not embarrass ourselves in front of the neighbors." As they set foot on the outpost's grated floor, the air hung heavy with the scent of neglect, like a locker room that hadn't seen a decent cleaning since the last Galactic War. The corridors were dimly lit, the kind of place where shadows had shadows and secrets whispered in the dark. Jerk glanced around. "I call dibs on not going first." "Too bad," Leora shot back. "You didn't call it before we got here." Rules of interstellar engagement. First to complain, first to lead. Hannah snorted as Jerk grumbled something about unfair leadership practices, but he took point nonetheless, his movements cautious and deliberate. The team crept through the labyrinthine outpost, every rustle and clang echoing like accusations of trespass. They were intruders in a place that wanted nothing to do with them, and the feeling was mutual. As they approached what appeared to be a control room, Leora tapped at the door panel, trying to override the lock. A spark of static bit at her fingers, and she cursed, giving the panel a kick for good measure. "Subtle," Hannah commented, raising an eyebrow. "Hey, sometimes you have to speak the language of machinery, which is violence," Leora replied, as the door slid open with a reluctant hiss. Inside, the room was a clutter of screens and consoles, the kind of organized chaos that only made sense to the deranged or the desperate. And from the looks of things, the outpost's occupants were both. "Looks like we've found the nerve center," Leora said, her gaze sweeping over the displays. "Let's see if we can tap into their systems and find Vex." Jerk moved to a console, fingers dancing over the keys as he attempted to hack into the outpost's network. It was a delicate dance, one misstep away from setting off alarms that would bring more trouble than they could handle. Hannah joined him, her fingers flying in tandem with his, the two of them working in silent synchronization. It was a beautiful thing to watch, like a duet performed against the backdrop of impending doom. As Leora watched, a thought struck her, a realization that had been gnawing at the edges of her mind since they left the station. There was something about the alien tech, something about the way it interacted with the emotion quantifier, that didn't sit right. It was like an itch she couldn't scratch, a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit the picture, and like any good scientist, she couldn't resist the urge to poke at it until it revealed its secrets. "Hey," Leora said, drawing the others' attention. "Remember how the Coalition's tech measures emotions? I think we might have found a bug or a feature, depending on how you look at it." Jerk glanced up, curiosity piqued. "What do you mean, the quantifier?" she explained, pacing as pieces fell into place. "It's designed to convert emotions into currency, right? But what if it isn't getting the full range of human emotions? What if there's something it can't measure?" Hannah blinked. "You mean like sarcasm?" Leora grinned. "Exactly. Cynicism, sarcasm, irony, all the flavors of human emotion that don't fit neatly into their categories. The system might be missing a significant chunk of our emotional spectrum." Jerk nodded slowly, catching on. "Which means it's vulnerable. If we can exploit that gap, we might be able to disrupt the system." "Exactly," Leora agreed, a spark of hope igniting. "We need to amplify those emotions, make them resonate in a way the Coalition didn't anticipate. Flood the system with everything it's been ignoring." Hannah's eyes gleamed with newfound determination. "So, you're saying we weaponize our cynicism?" "Pretty much," Leora replied with a smirk. Who knew being jaded would finally pay off? Jerk let out a low whistle. "That's insane." "Brilliant but insane. Story of my life," Leora said, turning back to the controls. "Let's get to work. If we can tweak the outpost systems, we might be able to broadcast those emotional frequencies. It's a long shot, but it's better than waiting for the Coalition to knock on Earth's door with an eviction notice." With renewed purpose, the team set to work, their movements quick and precise. It was a delicate operation, one that required as much finesse as it did brute force. They were hacking into the heart of alien technology, twisting it to their own ends with the sheer force of human ingenuity. As they labored, the air buzzed with tension, like static before a storm. Every keystroke was a gamble, every wire they spliced a bet against impossible odds. But there was no turning back now, only forward into the unknown. With a final flourish, Jerk hit the execute key, and the room hummed to life, a symphony of alien code singing beneath their fingers. It was a heady feeling, like standing on the precipice of something monumental, the future teetering on the edge of possibility. "Let's hope this works," Leora murmured, staring at the screens as data streamed by in a blur. "Otherwise, we're about to broadcast our failures to the entire galaxy." Hannah threw her a crooked smile. "At least it'll be an entertaining failure." The tension in the room was palpable, a living thing that coiled around them as they waited for a response. Seconds stretched into eternity, each tick of the clock a reminder of how precarious their situation was. Then, to their astonishment, the displays flickered, a cascade of error messages rippling across the screens. It was working. The system was reacting, struggling to process the surge of unquantifiable emotions they were feeding it. "We did it," Leora breathed, the words barely audible over the hum of the outpost systems. "The Coalition's tech can't handle it." Jerk clapped her on the back, his grin wide and triumphant. "Who knew that sarcasm would save the day? Shows what they know about humans," Hannah added, her expression a mix of relief and vindication. "We've always been more than the sum of our parts." But even as they celebrated their small victory, Leora's mind was already racing ahead, considering the implications. This was just the beginning, a single crack in the Coalition's facade. But with it came potential, the opportunity to turn the tide in their favor. "All right," she said, snapping back to the present. "We can't stay here too long or they'll catch on. Let's get what we need and get out before they realize what we've done." The team nodded, their movements efficient as they gathered their gear and prepared to make a hasty exit. They'd struck a blow against an overwhelming adversary, but the battle was far from over. As they made their way back through the outpost's shadowy corridors, Leora felt the weight of their mission settle on her shoulders once more. They'd bought themselves time, but the Coalition's deadline still loomed, a question mark hovering over their future. But despite the uncertainty, there was a fire in her chest, a fierce determination that refused to be extinguished. This was their fight, and they weren't about to go down without a struggle. Because if there was one thing humans were good at, it was defying the odds. And as long as there was breath in her lungs, Leora Phalanx wasn't about to let the Coalition take Earth without a damn good fight. The outpost was a relic of bureaucratic nightmares past. The corridors twisted like the galaxy's worst intestines, and the smell was fittingly reminiscent of a kitchen compost experiment gone horribly wrong. Leora led their ragtag crew, the fluorescent lights above flickering in a constant Morse code of doom. "Hope you've memorized the layout," Jerk grumbled, peering into a shadowy junction. "I didn't sign up to be Space Minotaur bait." "Relax, Jerk," Leora said, scanning their path with the navigation display. "I have an impeccable sense of direction. Plus, this thing's only gotten us lost twice today." Hannah chuckled, her eyes flicking to the flickering holographic map. "Who needs reliability when you've got a charming captain?" she quipped, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Exactly," Leora agreed with mock seriousness. "Charm is 90% of leadership. The other 10% is improvising when everything goes to hell." The intercom crackled, a familiar voice slicing through the static. "Phalanx, what's your status?" Commander Zane Thorne's gruff tone was as comforting as a bed of nails. "Just another stroll through the galaxy's favorite haunted house, Commander," Leora replied, keeping her voice light. "We're on schedule to disrupt the Coalition's tech and give their emotion tax a well-deserved kick in the pants. Try not to blow up the outpost in the process," Thorne advised, his sarcasm barely masking genuine concern. "It's a mess cleaning up after your explosions." "Noted," Leora said, cutting the connection. Explosions were only Plan C after all. They reached the heart of the outpost, a control room illuminated by the glow of countless screens, each one cluttered with alien script. It looked like a digital opium den for tech junkies with poor organizational skills. Jerk eyed the chaos. "Looks like we're about to rewrite the universe's worst code," he said, cracking his knuckles. "Great," Hannah said. "Let's hope our cyber vandalism makes the Coalition's annual budget meeting." With practiced ease, they divided tasks. Jerk and Hannah took to the terminals, fingers moving with the precision of concert pianists about to perform their ode to anarchy. Leora, meanwhile, focused on the alien tech, her hands deftly adjusting the emotion quantifier. "This thing's built like a FTL Rubik's Cube," she muttered, tracing the alien circuits. "One wrong move, and we could accidentally broadcast Jerk's browser history. I'd prefer we didn't air that particular horror show," Jerk said, not looking up from his screen. "Let's stick to wrecking the Coalition instead." Piece by piece, their plan began to take shape. The alien tech was more sensitive than a hyperspace sensor on Valentine's Day. It was a miracle it hadn't imploded from the weight of its own flimsiness. Leora adjusted a final component, and the emotion quantifier hummed with a new resonance. It was a sound somewhere between a purr and a growl, like a cat that wasn't sure whether to love you or kill you. "All right, team," Leora announced, adrenaline spiking her veins. "We're about to introduce these aliens to the full range of human cynicism. Let's see how they handle our brand of emotional honesty." Jerk initiated the sequence, his expression one of cautious optimism. "Initiating protocol call of the sarcastic. Let's hope this tech can handle sarcasm better than my last girlfriend." Hannah hit her console with a flourish. "Firing up the emotional resonance cannon," she declared. "Time to make the Coalition reevaluate their life choices." The outpost shuddered as the systems engaged, a low hum resonating through the floors. The emotion quantifier began to pulse, sending waves of sarcasm, cynicism, and irony rippling into the ether like a cosmic middle finger. "Status check," Leora asked, eyes fixed on the displays. Jerk scanned the readouts. "The Coalition's network is starting to fry. Their systems can't handle the input. It's like trying to download the universe on dial-up." "Fantastic," Leora said with a grin. "Let's hope their IT department doesn't have a quick fix for a total emotional meltdown." Outside, the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, awaiting the outcome. The Coalition's infrastructure was vast and complex, but under the onslaught of unmeasured human emotion, it was faltering. Hannah tapped her console, appraising the data with a critical eye. "We're seeing system-wide failures. Their diagnostics can't even pinpoint the problem. It's like trying to find a single cat hair in a wormhole." Leora laughed, the sound sharp and triumphant. "Serves them right for not considering sarcasm a viable threat. Let's hope their bosses are as confused as their tech." The terminal in front of her flickered, error codes dancing across the screen in a frenzy of alien panic. It was beautiful in its own way, like a modern art installation dedicated to hubris. "We've got them on the ropes," Jerk said, his grin a mirror of Leora's. "Who knew snark would be our secret superpower?" "A lesson for the ages," Hannah agreed. "Next time, maybe they'll think twice before underestimating Earth's most sarcastic." Leora stepped back from the console, satisfaction thrumming through her. They'd done it, struck a blow against an alien force with nothing but their wits and a penchant for verbal irony. "Time to make our exit," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "Let's leave them to their meltdown and get back to the shuttle." They moved with purpose, gathering their gear and leaving the control room in disarray. Behind them, the outpost systems continued to unravel, a testament to their ingenuity and resilience. As they navigated the corridors, the outpost shuddered, a final testament to its own demise. The Coalition would eventually recover, no doubt, but they'd be licking their wounds for a while. Jerk glanced at Leora as they hurried toward the docking bay. Think we've bought Earth enough time to figure out a more permanent solution? Leora shrugged, her expression wry. Time, maybe. A solution. That's another story. But at least we've shown the Coalition that humanity isn't going down without a snarky retort. Hannah snorted, her expression triumphant. Here's to sarcasm, the deadliest weapon in the universe. They reached the docking bay, the shuttle waiting like a faithful, if slightly battered, hound. Leora set the navigation display, feeling the weight of their actions settle in her chest. Let's get out of here before the Coalition sends a welcome party, she said, powering up the shuttle. The ship shuddered to life, engines groaning in protest but ultimately complying. They lifted off, leaving behind the outpost and its disintegrating systems like a memory best forgotten. As they soared into the void, Leora glanced at her crewmates, feeling a sense of camaraderie stronger than she'd ever imagined. They were a bunch of mismatched misfits, but they'd pulled off the impossible. Think we'll make it back to Earth without incident? Jerk asked, his tone optimistic despite the odds. Considering our luck, Leora replied with a smirk. Probably not, but hey, where's the fun in certainty? Hannah chuckled, leaning back in her seat. Let's just hope whatever disaster finds us next is at least entertaining. The stars stretched out before them, a vast expanse of unknowns. But for the first time in a long time, Leora felt a flicker of hope, a belief that they could stand against the universe and emerge victorious. Besides, she added, her voice confident and daring the universe to contradict her, I like to think we've got a few more surprises up our sleeves. With that, they left the outpost behind, the Coalition system still reeling from the onslaught of human emotion. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start, a testament to their grit and tenacity in the face of overwhelming odds. And as long as there were fights to be fought and battles to be won, Leora Phalanx was ready to lead her team into the fray, sarcasm and all. Because in the end, it wasn't just about survival. It was about proving that humanity was worth saving, that even in the depths of space, they could still find a way to shine. The shuttle hummed along the edge of the void, a tin can clinging to life amidst the indifferent stars. Inside, the crew basked in the quiet triumph of having just kneed the Galactic Coalition right in their bureaucratic privates. They'd sent the Coalition systems into chaos, and all it took was a little human irreverence and a lot of caffeine. Not bad for a day's work. Leora leaned back in her seat, staring out at the stars. Well, we did it, she said, more to the void than anyone else. We made the universe a slightly more sarcastic place. Hannah smirked, her feet kicked up on the console, not that she gave a damn about workplace safety. Who knew all it took to topple a galactic superpower was a good sense of humor? Humor and a healthy disregard for authority, Jerk added, glancing over the shuttle systems. Let's not forget the part where we flagrantly violated a dozen interstellar treaties. Minor details, Leora replied with a dismissive wave, like swatting away a particularly annoying fly. Besides, those treaties were lacking in sarcasm clauses. In any case, I'm sure the intergalactic lawyers will have a field day with this one. Lawyers everywhere rejoice, Hannah quipped. They'll be returning their yachts for bigger models. Leora turned to the console to check their course back to Earth. Say what you will about humanity, but we sure know how to give the finger to cosmic threats. And we're damn good at it, Jerk said, a smug grin playing on his lips. Who needs advanced weaponry when you've got snark? Commander Zane Thorne's voice crackled through the intercom, a reminder that the universe was still out there, waiting to mess up someone's day. Phalanx, report. Mission successful, Commander, Leora said, feigning seriousness. The Coalition systems are more fried than my morning eggs. Good work, Thorne replied, sounding like he'd rather be anywhere but talking to them. And the outpost, still in one piece, Leora promised, sort of. More or less. Try to keep it that way, Thorne said, his tone like a grumpy dad who just wanted 5 minutes of peace. Earth's got enough problems without adding cosmic rubble to the list. The intercom clicked off, leaving them in relative silence again. Jerk sighed, leaning back in his chair. Think they'll give us a medal for this? Hannah snorted. If by metal you mean a get-out-of-jail-free card, I'd settle for that. The conversation fizzled out, leaving the quiet hum of the ship to fill the space. Leora stared absent-mindedly at the star-streaked window, thinking about humanity's endless knack for getting into and out of trouble. "So," Jerk said after a while, "what's next for the galaxy's least likely heroes?" "Well, I suppose we could try establishing a Galactic Sarcasm Academy," Leora said dryly. "Teach the universe our ways." "Sure," Hannah added, "and maybe after that we'll solve galactic hunger by distributing sarcasm sandwiches." The ship continued its journey, and despite the bravado, the weight of what they'd pulled off was beginning to sink in. They'd bought Earth some time, but the bigger picture was still murky. The Coalition wouldn't stay down for long, and Earth still had to figure out how to pay its emotional debts. "Think we've changed anything?" Leora asked quietly. She wasn't looking for reassurance, just an honest assessment of their impact. Jerk shrugged. "We've made a dent." "Maybe that's enough for now." "Humanity's gotten pretty good at pulling last-minute saves," Hannah said, her voice laced with a bitterness that matched the universe's general ambience. "Besides, if the universe doesn't implode, we can always try something more ridiculous next time." Leora appreciated their optimism, even if it was soaked in cynicism. Maybe they hadn't solved the universe's problems, but they'd shown that humans could still be clever and defiant, even when the stakes were cosmic. "All right, enough soul-searching," she said, shaking off the introspection like an unwanted coat. "Let's get back to Earth before the Coalition decides to send a thank-you squad." As they neared Earth's orbit, the planet loomed in the distance, a blue and green marble speckled with clouds. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was home. And if there was one thing humans knew how to do, it was making their home worth fighting for. The shuttle began its descent, the atmosphere greeting them with a welcoming shudder. The ship rattled like a tin can in a hurricane, but Leora kept her hands steady on the controls. She wasn't about to let a little turbulence ruin her day. "Touchdown imminent," she called back to Jerk and Hannah. "Buckle up, and let's hope landing fees aren't as astronomical as the Coalition's sense of self-importance." The ship landed with a thud that echoed through the hull. They'd made it, and Earth still revolved around the sun, doing its best impression of a planet that wasn't on the brink of cosmic eviction. As they exited the shuttle, the air smelled of home, polluted and a bit too warm but familiar. Leora stretched, feeling the stiffness leave her limbs. It was good to be back, even if the galaxy's problems weren't far behind. They were greeted by a small crowd, 4 people and a very confused-looking janitor. Among them was Dr. Vex Icarus, his scruffy hair as wild as ever. "Leora, Jerk, Hannah," Vex said, his voice a mix of relief and exasperation. "You're back." "We're back," Leora confirmed, grinning. "And we brought a gift. The Coalition systems are in chaos courtesy of humanity's finest." Vex raised an eyebrow. "And I thought I was the reckless one. Well done." The small crowd, such as it was, gave a cheer. It wasn't much, but it was something, and it warmed Leora's heart more than she'd care to admit. Hisbot 3000 materialized beside Vex, its holographic form flickering slightly. "Survival chances have increased by approximately 2–3%, it declared cheerfully. "Ah, progress," Jerk said with a smirk. "It's a miracle we're not extinct." "Not yet anyway," Hannah added. "But there's always next week." As they headed back to their makeshift base, the weight of what they'd accomplished settled over them, not crushing but comforting in its own way. They'd faced down a cosmic entity with little more than wit and stubbornness, and they'd lived to tell the tale. Vex walked alongside Leora, his expression thoughtful. "You know, you might have just bought us enough time to figure out the Coalition's emotional conundrum." "Maybe," Leora said, gazing up at the sky. "But even if we haven't, we've shown them that Earth isn't just a resource to be consumed. We've got spirit and a hell of a lot of sarcasm." "And snark," Jerk added. "Can't forget the snark." The base was a ramshackle collection of tech and determination, but it was theirs. As they settled in, Leora couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They'd faced the universe and they'd shown it what humanity was made of, flaws and all. "So, what's the plan now?" Hannah asked, flopping onto a couch that had seen better days. Leora looked around at her crew, her friends. They'd come a long way and there was still a long road ahead. But for now, they had time. Time to regroup, to plan, to savor their small victory before the next challenge came barreling down. "We keep doing what we do best," Leora said. "We fight, we improvise, we make it up as we go along. And we prove to the universe that humanity is a force to be reckoned with, even if it doesn't always play by the rules." Jerk grinned. "Sounds like a plan. Or the lack of one. As long as it involves sticking it to the coalition, I'm in," Hannah added. They settled into the familiar routine of planning their next move, their laughter and sarcasm a shield against the universe's indifference. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was something, a start. Because at the end of the day, they'd proven that humanity was worth saving. That even in the vast, uncaring sprawl of space, they could still find a way to shine. And if that shine came with a side of snark and a healthy dose of irreverence, well, that was just the human way.